Hello and welcome to May's Multimodal Monday webinar. This month is actually Global Employee Health and Fitness Month. I didn't know that that was a thing, but it is a thing. And it's been around since 1979, so for a really long time. Obviously, the goal is to just focus on what can you as an employer do to bring more health and wellness and fitness to your employees' workday. And that can be anything from changing the food in the canteen to actually get them to move, which is what we're talking about today. Like, how can we incorporate more physical activity to and from work, but also maybe throughout the workday, right? When you have meetings, what can be done? So with that all said, I'm very pleased that I have two international experts joining me. I have Adriel Thornton joining us from MoGo Bikeshare. I'll leave the detailed introduction to you because you can talk a lot more about the specific work you're doing, which is very exciting. And then we also have Vlad from Fluidtime. I said it wrong again. Vlad Marica.
Marica. There we go.
Marica from Fluidtime, dialing in from Vienna, who's with one of the mobility as service providers, and one of their focuses in employee and corporate mobility as a service. So again, I'll let you introduce yourself, but because we're just emerging from the pandemic, or at least it feels like we're emerging, not quite sure, it seems like we're going back. But anyway, it's one of, I think in my lifetime anyway, the biggest disruption that I've seen to the workplace. And I think we're trying collectively to take stock and realize what that means, you know, from a remote work, and does it mean remote work or not? So with that in mind, I just want you to keep that as a backdrop to the question of introduce yourself and maybe say something about how that has impacted the work you're doing. Why don't we start with you, Adriel?
Great. So Adriel Thornton, I'm the executive director of MoGo, which is Metro Detroit's Bikeshare system. Actually, today is our 5-year anniversary. So we've existed in the city and been providing active transportation for the region for 5 years today. So very excited to be here. When it comes to the health and fitness aspect, our title sponsor for our Bikeshare system is Henry Ford Health and Health Alliance Plan, which is Henry Ford Health is a major hospital system here. Health Alliance Plan is their sort of insurance arm. And so they are title sponsors and have been since the beginning. They invested in a Bikeshare system here in the city of Detroit because they saw a connection between what they do and what we can provide. When it comes to the health and fitness of employees, an active transportation system is a natural fit. We look at ourselves as a transportation system and not just a recreational thing, even though people do use it for both. But one thing that people also use our system for is exercise. As we saw during the beginning of the pandemic and the height of the pandemic, we saw a lot of people who really, took our bikes and really that was the way that they were able to get outside, and the way that they were able to get some physical activity when they couldn't do anything else. The gyms were closed, everything else was closed. The one thing people could do is go outside, right? And do some form of physical activity. So we were happy to be able to do that. Even pre-pandemic, we noticed that employees, for instance, of certain places would use us as their exercise that day. So instead of going to the gym, they would actually get on one of our bikes and ride for 30, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, to get that in during the course of the day. So I think that's a big difference in the micromobility world with active transportation. It allows you to burn some calories, to get some exercise, even if that isn't your intent. So.
Yeah, and I think it's such a logical fit, like technically, right? I'm I will say for Bikeshare and active transportation in general, I'm very happy. I think that the pattern you've seen, that people used it more for, recreational during the pandemic, or just like to get that little bit of exercising because they didn't need to move as much anymore. I think that's across the globe. We've seen it here in Vancouver, where I'm based, with the Bikeshare here, but I also know the same from European, the Paris system in particular, which we looked at last year, Valley. So yeah, natural fit. So Vlad, tell us what you guys are doing and what you're doing.
So, hi everybody, my name is Vlad Marica. I'm the head of sales for Fluidtime Data Services. We're a Vienna, Austria-based company. We've been around since 2004, and we provide turnkey integrated mobility and MaaS solutions. In our history, we've really made a lot of mobility apps and a lot of mobility technology, starting from I guess maintenance apps and maintenance databases for public transport buses, up to putting out the largest public transport app in Austria. It was called Quando. Back then, it had something like 650,000 unique users. In the past, let's say 5 to 6 years, we started looking into more into mobility as a service, and we've further developed our technology even before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, we're seeing that the fragmentation that used to be out there, you had B2G mobility, you had B2B mobility, you had B2C mobility. I think that fragmentation is becoming 1 degree of magnitude higher. We had a lot of different bodies. We had the regulators, we had the transport service providers, we had the different private companies, maybe even private transport service providers who wanted to provide mobility to everyone. And now, especially in the context of employer mobility, we've seen that everything is just getting kind of murky and a bit more opaque and complicated. I mean that in the sense that employers most of the time have had their employees come to the office, but now they're in this kind of mixed state, or is somewhere between either stay at home or hybrid model, or come to the office. And I think that it's becoming increasingly harder to keep track of where everybody is. It's getting harder and harder to figure out what people need depending on what they're doing. And it's also getting harder and harder to devise strategies for companies that allow them to A, motivate their employees, and B, do that in a financially viable and sustainable fashion. Mm-hmm. So I guess that what we're learning from this is that we need clear tools, we need good technology to allow people to talk to each other. So companies to talk to their employees, and employees to talk to their companies and communicate their needs, share their offerings, because we're talking about the way that companies can motivate their employees for more health and more mobility, or more active mobility, I guess. So I think that, to summarize it, everything is getting a bit fragmented, and we need the tools to fix it.
Which leads me to kind of the big question, or the big shift I'm seeing in Europe is like, there's a rethinking of this ubiquitous company car business that, it's everywhere. And so whether that's, policy push in France, like where the employer is forced to come up with a mobility plan that includes anything but the company car, or, even BMW, which still, by the way, provides a lot of company cars, but internally they have a program to support sustainable mobility. And I'm like, it caught my eye last week because they just gave out the 15,000th cargo electric bike to one of their employees. It's for internal, right? But so there's clearly a shift. It's a rethinking. It's at least a discussion. So what will it actually take? Vlad, I think maybe you can answer that. What will it take to shift, really? And also, it's great that we're giving cargo bikes away, but how, which is active, right?
Right.
But how do we also make sure, while we're shifting, that we focus on this kind of active and healthier ways of moving around?
So I think that what it takes is just really good communication in the first step. It communication to figure out what employees need, to figure out what companies have to offer, and to see if there's any sort of middle ground between the two. We see that companies interact with their employees on multiple levels. Companies have their headquarters, they have branches, and then employees are all over the place between the headquarters, the branches, home office, and so on and so forth. So I think that the first thing that companies need is some sort of way, it's an information portal where they can talk to their employees and then the employees can talk back. They can talk about what's happening in human resources, what's happening with sales, what are the new policies regarding company offerings or company mobility. And this just sets the base for communication where everybody can get informed and everybody also has the potential to be motivated by the different offerings. As we were saying beforehand, we want to go further from company cars, but we also see that companies always have something to offer. It might be company bicycles. That's a really big trend in Europe, or cargo bikes that you're talking about with BMW. Companies can offer bicycles, companies can offer meeting rooms, companies can offer yoga classes, massages, you name it. There's a very, very wide array of things that companies can give to their employees to motivate them or to push them in a certain direction. So I think that it's also important to realize that companies don't really want to spend more money on offering these things. They're expensive through their own nature. So besides the information portal, there's a need for companies to make all of these resources available and bookable and shareable with very, very little costs. Ultimately, we would like to see these resources, and we're actually working on technology to integrate these resources into a MaaS platform where everybody all of your employees can connect to it and book them as well. And besides that, my last point is that employees will always need mobility. So companies should make it easy for employees to get non-car based mobility with the golden path of integrated planning, integrated booking, and integrated payment, if relevant.
It's so interesting that you brought in other health offering, which I didn't think about, but it makes a lot of sense that if you are building kind of a mobility platform that connects and makes resources shareable and bookable, it obviously makes sense that you also add the other resources that maybe previous to the pandemic, people would just access it when they were in the building, but now that they're maybe not in the building, it makes sense.
And we don't have to resume it to companies, because we see that big landlords, for example, or small communities, they have their own customers. They have their tenants, they have their inhabitants, and it's one-to-one exactly the same kind of relationship that companies have to their employees. So in an ideal world, we would like to see employees being able to profit from their companies or their employers' offerings, their communities' offerings in one single app. And this is technology that we're working on.
Right. Adriel, we'll flip in a second to kind of more of the demographic piece, but I am curious what you've seen, because I think it's a bit of a stereotype that people always think North America is behind Europe when it comes to mobility. Now, in this particular case, when it comes to tech and mobility, I think sometimes we're actually a little bit ahead. I don't know what you've seen in Detroit and what the shift has been to connect these things better.
Yeah, it's been a little different of a use case here. We have actually a lot of the same players that Vlad mentioned, whether it's corporations, cities, or developers approach, to incorporate non-motorized transportation or options into their plans, right? But a lot of it here has to do with parking mitigation, right? Which is really sort of a problem here in the city of Detroit, at least for a variety of reasons. But it's a lot of it that's the impetus, right? And then I think so many of the other things have been secondary. I think that this pandemic may have altered that a little bit. And you see it in other cities as well that have bike share systems, where, again, parking all of a sudden was less of an issue, right? But now that, moving back into a hybrid system of, work, is not just the only scenario to like deal with. For us as a bike share system, it certainly changed the dynamic of how people were using our bikes. A huge chunk of our folks, used it to commute. And now, those same people are using it for different reasons, not necessarily to get to and from work, but they still like having access to a bike share system because they still want to go run errands that way. They still want to, do the things they need to do without using a car. So it's been a really interesting sort of take. But again, I will say that now we're seeing sort of a shift towards health mitigation, right? So, the city of Detroit especially was hit pretty hard in the early days of the pandemic. We were one of the US hotspots really early on. I think we were second only to New York for a long time. And it really did shine a highlight on some of the health inequities that exist here, healthcare inequities that exist here. And this idea that, we are the motor city. And so the idea of biking, for instance, for other reasons, other than recreation, sort of were highlighted, right? People were sort of saying, hey, it's in my best interest to be healthier, to do more, to be more active, to get out and do more things. So instead of getting in my car and driving to, the restaurant that's recently back open, there's a bike share station near my house and there's a bike share station there. So maybe that's a healthier choice, right? And a better choice. So we do see that sort of paradigm shift beginning to take place. We're not there yet. And I think that, there might be some other places in the US that might be a little further ahead in that sort of mindset. But, that's also probably because, the biking infrastructure and things like that might be a little more advanced. Even though Detroit has been making some great strides in sort of creating that sort of infrastructure and pushing that narrative around what biking really means. But, we're facing the same challenges here, of getting, sort of an integrated system or integrated flow of information, from consumer to provider, to company, to, government. And so I think that's the next big challenge and the next big step for us that would make this all make sense. But, we still, have to keep in mind that active transportation, even though like MoGo, for instance, we're one of two big cities in the United States. Portland is the other one that has what we call an adaptive bike share system, which is something that is for people of all abilities, and people who may face some challenges, right? Cognitive or physical challenges. Anybody who can't ride a regular two-wheel bicycle, right? So we offer that, but it's not really designed for transportation. It's more for recreation, but it's still that health benefit, right? But, I say that to say that even though we have the system, we recognize that not everyone can actually participate in active transportation. So, it's really figuring out different ways that we can get people who don't want to use motorized transportation. What other options can we provide? How can we expand, say, on our adaptive system? What are the things that we can do in order to provide that, knowing that, again, not everybody can actually use active transportation in the same way. So that's a big piece of the puzzle too.
And I think that leads really neatly into kind of this demographic question, because apart from, as you said, there's people with different abilities, and an adaptive system caters to more, but doesn't solve everybody. But there's also biking specifically, I will say North America has this idea is white male, ultra clad, like I need a super expensive bike. Right. And then on the shared mobility, so that's on the regular bicycling side. And then on the shared mobility side, we have seen numbers and numbers of studies now that just show we're building more solutions for, white male, well-educated, higher income demographic that already has lots of choices.
Mhm.
And I know that MoGo specifically has done some tremendous work, and it's one of the few organizations that has really tried and figure out, okay, how do we make it attractive? So what can you share there? Because there's employees in all demographic segments, and we can't just, build some great solutions for one. So how do you get other segments to participate? What does it take to make it attractive?
Yeah, so I mean, step one is, community engagement. When we launched our system, when we did our expansion in 2020, even now, any place that we say we want to have, like, deploy a station, right, or provide a Bikeshare to, the first thing we do is go into that community. We do community meetings, and we ask them, number one, do you even want this? Right? Will you use this? And then, two, where would you use it at? Where should we put it at? I do think that, like most things in America, they're designed with a certain demographic in mind, that is, from a marketing standpoint, the most attractive. And then they do a lot of follow-up after the fact, or when they've been called out, to sort of make it accessible to other people, right? I will say that here, we baked into our system the idea of accessibility and equality for all, right? So we want to be really equitable in our approach. It's a bike, it's a bike share system, which you would not think would be super political, but it is. And right, like most things in America, we can take a plant and make it political. Actually, we've done that. But so again, I think step one is it's a community outreach, but it's also in sort of, you have to sort of explain the case for what it is that you want to do. It's not, I think, to pretend that it's the solution to everything and that Bikeshare is going to solve every single problem is not, that's not real, that's not reality. But we can solve some issues, and accessibility and transportation is one of them. And going in and saying, hey, this is for you. We know that demographic doesn't live in your community, right? Detroit is the largest predominantly Black city in the United States. So appealing to that white male hipster bike rider is not going to fly here, right? So it's really simple things, like getting buy-in, in our marketing schemes, right? And photos that we choose to use to put out or to promote our system. We make sure that there's representation of the people who actually live here. That's it seems really simple, but it's astonishing to me how often other systems don't do that. And that's really basic. That's human nature. When you see people who look like you represented on something, you then believe, or you understand that it's at least inclusive of you, right? That you are welcome to use this, or you're welcome to participate in this. And so, when you don't see that, it's kind of like, oh, well, that looks nice, but it's not really for me, or I'm not the intended user. So then people won't use it. So that being a really simple thing is something that we do, right? These are sort of the little things that we do. And I'm not going to, I hate it when people equate Black and brown people with low income or poverty. So I want to be clear that I'm not making that connection, but we do have a high percentage of people in poverty here who can't do things like they can't afford a car, and maybe some other forms of mass transit are maybe out of reach for them. So we launched, 5 years ago, with something that we call the Access Pass, right? And so that's available to anyone who receives state benefits, like a bridge card, which is food assistance. If you have health care assistance, child care assistance, any of those state programs, you qualify for an annual pass, which is normally $90. If you get if you receive those state benefits, you qualify for that same pass for $5. That's an annual pass.
Mhm.
Same, operates the exact same way as our regular $90 annual pass. That's 24/7, 365 access to the bikes. Use it whenever you want. You get that for $5. So that is another piece of the equity and inclusive pie, right? Which is people who we didn't want lack of money to be a barrier for people to get to where they have to go, right? So along with that, we've always incorporated a pay with cash option. So those are a couple of things that as a system, we made sure that we included in the mix so that the people who really need this as a transportation option could access it. That really makes it inherently more than just that specific demographic that we talked about.
Yeah. So it's almost
I find that very, very interesting because I was looking at universal basic mobility a while ago, and I realized that obviously we can talk about correlation, causation, but people who have more access to mobility are more likely to come out of whatever social blanket they're on and go up. And congratulations to you for your scheme and going towards that sort of universal access to mobility.
Yeah, it just makes sense, right? Like, I mean, and it makes, the thing is that it makes business sense for organizations. We're a nonprofit organization, so our business model is a little different, but even for folks that are for profit, right? It just makes more sense. More people can use your thing, your product, no matter what it is, if they can afford it, right? So if you reduce that barrier, it just makes more business sense to you. We don't make any money off of our access pass, right? It's really, it's subsidized, and it's not a moneymaker for us, but that's not the point. The point is that we, being a mission-based nonprofit organization serving this city, want to have, again, as many people be able to access our system as possible. So it makes a lot of sense in a lot of other ways, other than just the bottom line. So I think if you have that sort of mindset going into transportation, going into mobility, period, that we all win, right? So the more people who are using bikes for things other than just pure recreation encourages cities or governments to say, hey, maybe we need to invest in bike infrastructure. Maybe we need to have bike lanes here. Maybe we need to make, maybe we need to do a road diet. Maybe we need to do all these things. But you need like the user first, right? In a lot of cases. So that it just helps just push all of that along, which makes it all safer for all of us. And better for all of us in a variety of ways. The health, of a community, getting people out of cars, and even walking, biking, just being physically active, improves the health of a community so much that it's kind of astounding. It improves the environment. I mean, there's so many reasons that we know in 2022, we've got so many challenges facing us that these are some of the simple things we can do to help mitigate some of that.
And I find it really, like, you essentially address three demographics and I know I was being very dramatic with my, white, men, but
that was the stereotype. That was
exactly,
the
it's
stereotype
still around.
Yeah.
And so, like, you address essentially the ones that have less physical mobility, you address the ones that have less access to, whether it's a credit card or whatever it is, like they just need some support on the financial side. And then you address it becomes more inclusive because I feel like, oh, this person looks like my neighbor. She's driving the bike. So you essentially addressed all of this. What I was going to say, so because one of the other challenges, and you kind of touched upon it earlier on, is this battle between parking and space, public space that is, just public space that's allocated to a car, whether it's lane or parking, and these new modes that also need infrastructure. And I find it, I'm really curious to know, how do you deal with that shift? And I do want to bring the employer back in. How can we get employers to be part of helping us with that shift? Because it's, to give you an example, I work with a group out of Europe, and they did what they call clean up 2 neighborhoods of cars, which just meant they took, I think, 12 parking spots away to put a mobility hub in. And they had literally every bike tire slashed in the neighborhood, like every bike tire, Bikeshare, non-Bikeshare,
Right.
like any bike tire. So how do we, and can we get essentially employers and corporate groups help us with this shift? Thoughts?
So if Vlad, if you don't, I'm sorry, which I know I've been talking about. Well, I'll just say one thing that we've seen in Detroit. So again, going back to sort of parking mitigation, we've got some organizations here who have been incentivizing their employees to use any other form of transportation other than a single occupancy car, right? So that includes I know that one big employer here partnered with a ride sharing app that wasn't one of the big ones, but one where anybody in that company could sign up and request to say, hey, I'm going to work at 9 a.m. And so within a certain geographic range of them, other employees could go and be like, hey, I live within 3 miles of you. I'll share that, like we'll carpool. Basically, it was a carpooling app. And so it was, all of a sudden you had folks, and for every time that they did that, the driver got paid, and the employee got some incentive as well to do that. There are one of our biggest, actually our biggest university in the city of Detroit, Wayne State University, partnered with us, DDOT, which is Detroit's bus service, and SMART, which is our suburban bus service, to provide free passes for those 3 entities to their entire student body, faculty, and staff. So all of those people, like we've had thousands of Wayne State University employees or students sign up for an annual MoGo pass because they're getting it free from the university, right? So that is one way that they did it for parking mitigation, right? For traffic and parking mitigation. But that's a huge incentive for people who are involved with that organization. So that's one way that they can do it, is just incentivize it. It costs them less to do that than to maintain parking structures, parking spaces, parking meter people, all of that. Shuttle services, it costs them way less to do this, to just pay for the passes, than it does for them to maintain and run that system. So that's a big way that organizations can actually really encourage this and to get people to really adopt this. Vlad, I don't know if you had something. I know I've been talking a lot.
To continue what Adriel was saying, I think there's a lot of things that you can do, and at least on this side of the pond, people tend to be a bit more polite and not slash each other's tires, especially when they're they do it in the city, no problem, but when they're at their work, at their office, they probably don't do it. So that's one thing you can do. We were actually working together with companies in Europe who had different company goals and different CO2 reduction goals and so on and so forth. And because they were somewhere out of town, the CO2 commuting footprint actually counted towards their company's CO2 footprint. So what they did was what they wanted to do was to start this gamification scheme where they would gradually reduce the number of parking spots and offer alternatives to employees driving in. You could book the parking spots through the app. It was very, very simple. And they had a gamification scheme where you would get a certain number of points if you wouldn't take your car, and you would lose a certain number of points if you took your car to the office. that's one very easy thing that you can do as a company, and generally as a body, maybe as a university or a student body or whatever. We're having live example of this in the Netherlands, for example. There's universities that are up till now, they were giving their students a free public transport card that they can use on public transport. And now what they're doing is they're piloting a program where they're replacing this public transport card with a monthly app-based mobility budget that you can use on public transport, on shared modes, so bike sharing, car sharing, and so on and so forth. They didn't really have they didn't put a lot of marketing into this. There were 300 spots free in the program. With no marketing, or with not much marketing, I would say there were 4,000 students who said that they were interested in it. So, wow. So a 13-to-1 basically ratio.
Yeah, and just to address again the sort of the tire slashing incident, we've seen, maybe not that dramatic, I'm sure it's happened, but we definitely have seen pushback to things like bike lanes and even us putting a bike share station. One place which, if it's a big station, could take up, 3 or 4 parking spaces. And I think that, that's a much bigger issue that, say, again, I don't have the voice to be able to speak to folks, but I think that's a governmental sort of thing, right? That can say and really get this word out that, one, this love affair that we have with the car, which I still have one, right, is a little crazy. It's like being in a bad relationship where, they hurt you over and over, but you still
safe to use the word toxic, right?
Right. It's literally a toxic relationship. But I think more importantly, this idea that the road, right, is just for cars. It's a really interesting fact. Detroit, which had the first paved road in America, right, was actually paved for bikes. Detroit in the 1800s was bike city. We had one of the largest amounts of bikes in the United States here in Detroit. So the paved road was actually created for bikes and not for the car, right? So little known Detroit history. But as the automobile advanced and everything like that, these streets became less and less pedestrian friendly, became less and less bike friendly, became really solely for the car. And I think that government's making decisions. Like, one thing that has been happening in Detroit is that they've been doing what they call streetscapes and road diets on a lot of different roads, right? Which sort of reduces, based on use, reduces what could have been a 4-lane street into a 1-lane street that does include parking, but also includes a bike lane on one side. It includes bump outs for people who are waiting for buses, making it more attractive and safer to access that. And while there's, some people who don't know about it, who get, initially annoyed by it, I have attended many of the community meetings that the city has done when they're about to do a streetscape or a road reduction sort of thing, and they do a lot. And once they make the case, the community almost always says, yes, this is what we want. This is a much better, it's safer. Your senior citizen can cross the street safer. Children can ride along that, on the street safer because they have a protected bike lane. So many different things about it make a lot more sense, but you got to go and you got to make the case, right? You have to talk to people, and then you will see way less pushback. You'll see less instances of vandalism against things like mobility stations or mobility hubs. It's really just, again, going out and making the case for why it is that you're doing what you're doing and how this actually benefits. Businesses, every business up and down that strip said, yes, we need this. It slows traffic down so that people can actually see their businesses, and in a weird kind of way makes it easier to park so that people can get in and get out. And then when you have more pedestrians and more bicyclists, we know that small businesses actually really benefit more from bicyclists and pedestrians than they do from people in cars. And it's because those people have an easier time to be able to stop and go into those businesses, but also to just see them in the first place.
And I love how we just like circle and brought it back to the community. I will also say the other thing that I love, and I'm tying this back to the earlier comments, is like, if you are able, or if we're all able to increase the number of people in the shared system, whether that's through corporate programs, employee programs, or what you've done at MoGo, we have ambassadors in the communities. That's what I think, right? If you all of a sudden see the value for yourself of this bike station, or this, I have access to this bundle, like Vlad's example from the university, you're probably less likely to go and push back when there is more offering being rolled out. So with that all said, I realize we're bumping up to our time slot. So I just would love to hear what your mobility wish. We said mobility wish 2022, but let's just say it's almost halfway through 2023. For the next 12 months, what's your mobility wish in how we get more employees to move around? Can be anything, okay?
Vlad, you want to go?
We want more transport service provider, be they public or private, just to be on board. We want them to be open. We want them to be open to partnerships, to be open to new business, to be open to integrating themselves and working together with mass schemes, so that we reach a critical mass of people who are willing to go the extra mile on foot and not in their private car.
I have a very similar wish. I really do wish that, the transportation systems that exist, at least here, find a way to really make a seamless integration for the people that use those services, whether they are using a bus or a car share or a bike share, whatever the case may be. As being able to really opt for one, but then be able to easily access the other and make that sort of transition seamless, I think would be a benefit to all of us. And would really get people into the mindset of using an alternative way to get around than, again, the single occupancy vehicle. I really do wish that would happen in the next 12 months.